Hello everyone and welcome to Traffic Corner Tuesday. My name is Nancy Crow and I'm the Vice President of Marketing for SPAC Consulting and your host for today's session. Next. All right, so before we begin, I'd like to remind everyone of a couple housekeeping details. If you would, please mute your mics to minimize the background noise during the presentation. And join the conversation. Today's presentation is intended to be an interactive dialogue, so I encourage you to ask questions and share your experiences throughout the presentations. Just chat with us using the box on your screen, type in your question, and our presenters will respond throughout the presentation. Also, I want to take a moment and thank you for participating in today's session. We've received a lot of positive feedback and ideas from past attendees, which is how we came up with today's topic. And as a thank you, at the end of this session, we will be providing attendees with instructions on how to get a free copy of the 13 Travel Demand Management Strategies Guide. So stick around to the end to learn how you can get your free guide. I also want to share with you that today's presentation is actually brought to you by SPAC Enterprises. SPAC Consulting is part of that group along with 5 other traffic engineering related companies. Mike on Traffic, as many of you know, is a traffic engineering blog. We post content twice a week and have a great newsletter every Thursday. Counting Cars is an online store selling traffic data collection products. SPAC Consulting not only brings you Traffic Corner Tuesday, but is a traffic engineering firm that works with businesses throughout the U.S. SPAC Academy is an online store selling digital tools for transportation professionals. Traffic Data Inc. is our local traffic data collection firm located here in Minneapolis. And finally, tripgeneration.org is our online source for free trip generation data. Looking ahead into the next couple of weeks, we do have a session scheduled for June the 27th on trip generation. We've done a lot of work internally collecting data on fast food and fast casual enterprises, so please join us for our trip generation on that topic. We look forward to seeing you at the end of June. Now on to our presenters. Today our session is brought to you by the 2 foremost traffic engineers on the internet, Mike Spack and Bryant Fiesick. Mike is the president of SPAC Consulting and he is the recognized industry leader of traffic studies. He is a graduate of the University of Minnesota, past president of North Central Section of the Institute of Transportation Engineers, and a fellow of the Institute of Transportation Engineers. Since 1996, Mike has led over 1,000 traffic engineering projects. During the past 2 decades, Mike has founded 4 companies, including SPAC Consulting, and he is also the creative force and principal writer of the industry-leading blog, Mike on Traffic. He's an accomplished author with articles published in industry publications as well as several industry manuals that are used by engineers around the world. A fun fact about Mike is that he enjoys spending time at his cabin during the summer with his family, doing some swimming and catching up on a good book. Also joining us today is Bryant Fiesick. He is the Vice President of SPAC Consulting, and he is also widely known in the transportation industry, having managed more than 700 traffic engineering projects. He is also a graduate of the University of Minnesota, and he is an expert in Synchro, SimTraffic, Vistro, and vSim traffic modeling software packages, and he thrives on developing creative solutions to traffic and transportation issues. Bryant is a regular contributor on Mike on Traffic blog and a published author in industry publications as well as co-author of several industry manuals. An interesting fact about Bryant is that he enjoys making ice cream with his children during the summer, and his latest flavor creation is lemon custard ice cream. So please join me, Mike and Bryant.
All right, thank you everyone. Happy to be back. Although we don't have a video, we are currently in our new office digs close to downtown Minneapolis. Moved in just a couple weeks ago, testing out our new conference room here, and it's good from our end. Hopefully the audio everything is going okay there.
Great. I'm seeing somebody else. Mike here. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, our tests in the office, we're getting the thumbs up. We have audio and around the internet. Let's see. TK and GJ might be your computer. So with that, we are rolling in today. We're talking about travel demand management plans. Let's move on here to the first topic. So traffic impact studies, which is where most of us in the traffic engineering world at least know how to do traffic impact studies, studied it in school. But really the main purpose of a traffic impact study is to analyze the traffic, vehicular traffic coming in and out of a development or an area. It's assessing just cars. And working much more on the supply side of the supply-demand equation.
So if we switch to the travel demand management plan now, if the TIS focuses on cars, the travel demand management will focus on the other modes of traffic. So this encompasses everything else really. So it could be trains, could be buses, bicycles, definitely pedestrians are in there, and for those who are still transforming our cities, segways. So and capture all those different modes. This is what we're looking at for the TDMP. So as Mike put it, the TIS is focused on the supply, kind of the infrastructure and what's being provided, and do we need to add more? Should we add a turn lane? Should the intersection be signalized or provide a roundabout? It's really looking at, do we need to provide more pavement, more space for those vehicles to get around?
And then on the travel demand management plan side, where we are looking at demand, instead of supplying more turn lanes, traffic signals, are there actually strategies we can employ at those office buildings, those employers, maybe even residential buildings? Are there ways we can get people to basically not drive by themselves during rush hour? Can they get around? Can they carpool? Can they take transit? Can they bike? Can they walk? Can they actually avoid going during rush hour? There's a lot of measures we'll be talking about.
So trying to get more choices, really. Some of you might recognize this photo. It's a recreation of one earlier, but it's just demonstrating the space for these different modes. It's about 60 to 70 people. I can't remember the exact number. But as you just look across, you can see, yes, it'd be a very packed bus, but they could all fit on one bus. Or if they were taking bikes, you can see how much room that covers, and then the last one on the right, just how much space is needed. If they all drive separately, they're all taking their own car. So just, again, visually just showing the difference in these different modes. So if we can get people out of their cars, and it doesn't have to be everybody, but the more we can get out of that single occupancy, the better the use of our infrastructure is, less we need.
So today we're going to be going through what we do in a typical travel demand management plan, as well as talk about some of the research we've done on their effectiveness. And as Nancy mentioned, we have a guide put together that goes through a lot of specific strategies. We're not going to be hitting on all of those specific strategies, but we encourage you to dial in to get that guide so you can read up on all the specifics there.
So this is from our standard table of contents. Again, this is our own format. I'm not aware of any national format, although all these components are very similar across, but this is how we put it together, our simple table of contents. So looking at the first one, intro and summary, this is where we put our executive summary. So if you're only going to read one page, this is going to be it for us. It's just the key takeaways of what we found with the TDMP. So pretty basic.
And if you've sat in on any of our talks about how we do traffic impact studies, the common theme here is we very strongly believe in a very readable, solid one-page executive summary that a politician, my great-grandma, anyone can read that introduction and summary, understand basically what we did and what we're recommending.
Yeah. What are we looking at? What's the purpose of it? And what's the outcome?
So then the next section is typically pretty short as well, but we'll go through and we'll discuss what the development is. We'll have a site plan, location map, just give the key bullet points related to what is being proposed to give that background.
Yep, so if it's residential, like an apartment building, something like that, how many rooms is it going to be? If there's retail on the first floor, how big is that going to be? So just all the characteristics we try to put into that section so people know what's being proposed.
Okay, and then here in Minnesota, different communities have different goals of what they're trying to accomplish with travel demand management plans. The city of Minneapolis has been requiring TDMPs for quite a while, I think approaching 20 years.
Yeah, they've been on board for a while.
And they strongly are pushing this model of working on the demand side of the curve, and they have specific goals. We've been told, and they have published in some places, they're trying to reduce vehicle trips 30%, and they're trying to move mode shares more towards 30% bicycling and walking and 40% transit. So they have really lofty aspirations, but Minneapolis has been at this a while, and we really are proud now that we're relocated into Minneapolis. I mean, it's one of the best bicycling cities in America, always rated in the top 5 and often battling for the #1 position. And a lot of that is because of City of Minneapolis, their policies, their goals, building the bike lanes, the infrastructure, but also requiring developers to build in bike locks, storage lockers, and shower rooms, and those kinds of things to really make it easy on those bicycling commuters.
All right, so now we get into a little bit more of the meat of the document, analysis of existing conditions. This doesn't have to be extensive, but the idea here is to go through all the different parts of what's out there today. So we try to capture all the different modes. So are there sidewalks around the site? Are there trails nearby? Does transit run nearby? What do the roads look like too? So really just grabbing all that information and putting it down to say, here's what's out here today. Here's what you're coming into.
We're basically painting the picture of the multimodal situation out there. Then next, often, I should say, coupled with these TDMPs is a traditional traffic impact study that we'll do a separate traffic impact study, and we will attach it in the appendix, which we'll get to on number 8 here. But in the TDMP, if we have done a traffic impact study, we will briefly summarize the findings of that impact study, and then we will also, whether there is an impact study or not, in this section we will do a trip generation and a parking generation calculation for the proposed development.
And this is where you can also look again at all those different modes. So if there aren't sidewalks, should there be, at least in front of the main doors? If there isn't transit, or the stop is a couple blocks away, should that be changed, or do you need that connection to the transit stop? So it's really looking at taking what's available that we just looked at in existing and saying, now how can we make sure that this new site can make use of what's out there or improve what's out there?
And a key thing we hit on in this section is we talk about loading zones.
Yes.
For commercial retail, whether there's loading docks, is it going to happen on the street? We try to commit the developer to trying to work towards off-peak periods for deliveries. And we should say that this becomes a binding, our preferences, the TDMP becomes a binding document that basically the developer agrees to what we're doing, what we're recommending, and we work with them, we lay out, you'll get these strategies in the guide, but the different kind of mix and match of what we're going to do with this development becomes their travel demand management plan, and they agree to implement this plan.
Yeah, we should have put a shot of our title page on there, but we sign it, which we do for most of our reports, but it's then also signed by the responsible party for the developer, maybe the developer themselves, maybe the person who's going to operate the building, but then also by a couple people at the city. So everybody gets together, they've all reviewed it, they all agree on all these points, and now with the signatures, we're binding ourselves to that.
Yes. And then conclusions, recommendations, which...
Skip back one. We didn't actually talk about the...
Okay.
So the TDM plan here, travel demand management, this is where we would actually get into those strategies. So this is, we've talked about the infrastructure, what's out there for the different modes, and whether we have improvements. Now we get to other strategies that connect with those, which again, we'll have more details, but it's looking at all these different items and trying to figure out now how best can we make sure that people want to use those different facilities out there, or make sure we're doing the best to encourage those choices.
So then we get into the conclusions, recommendations, which is very high level. Usually this is a pretty short section, but basically says the developer is going to implement these strategies, and here are the basics of what we found.
And then we don't highlight it, but attachments is on there too. That's just like Mike said, the traffic impact study, if we have one, will usually provide a bigger site map. Any other figures, anything or counts, all goes in those attachments. But one thing to point out here too, you can see by our numbers there, this document is actually relatively short. I mean, we covered everything in about 12 pages there. So our attachments are much longer, but it becomes a very readable document because it is pretty short. We try to summarize things where we can, show it graphically where we can, but just like with the executive summary, we try to make sure it's readable.
Yeah, very good point. So then I mentioned a little bit about 10 years ago when I was really digging into TDMPs and we started to do a lot more, I did a lot of online research, and we've continued to do online research trying to figure out how effective are TDMP, the plans themselves, the individual strategies. And from what we have not been able to find, we believe this is a huge area for potential research. But we've gone out a couple of times now, a couple different years, and done our own studies of office buildings within Minneapolis, St. Paul area that have implemented travel demand management plans. We've done it kind of coming out of the recession, then we did it again later to confirm. Mm-hmm. And what we've found is for the different uses, the trip generation across the board, kind of the averages, are compared to ITE trip generation rates, we're finding about a third less traffic being generated in the peak hours at employers, office buildings, those kinds of uses that have travel demand management plans and are implementing the strategies. And we've found that peak parking, which is generally mid-morning, that is reduced about 20%. So we've done our own studies. You can find it at Mike on Traffic. We've written about it extensively. But this is really the proof that we then take back to our clients and say, look, you can implement these strategies. They're very cost effective. And if you can reduce the amount of parking you need to build 20%, there's real cost savings here.
That's a huge savings.
Especially if we're getting into structured parking. Mm-hmm. I mean, where you're pushing 5 figures per parking stall on average, the cost of that. So we try to tie it back to dollars and cents for our clients.
Yeah, no, this was specifically for offices, but I'm pretty confident in saying you're going to see these type of results across the board for residential and retail, just as we try to implement these things and give other people the choices to do something else, they will.
Yes.
All right, so now let's turn to the actual strategies. So like we've been saying, we've got the guide that goes through some of the specific ones. So what we're trying to do here is give you kind of the overarching themes of what we look at as we try to develop these strategies. And these are constantly changing. We're always trying to update it. Frankly, the cities are always trying to push us to come up with more and more that could be done. Some of the things that we just started working on, or some of the things we wrote down a few years ago, are no longer acceptable because they want to go beyond it. So they keep trying to make it better and better.
And a good point is 10 years ago we were putting up a lot of flyers and big bulletin boards with bus schedules and a lot of those types of things, and telling people about different van sharing. Well, all of a sudden we have Uber and phone apps, and you could just go to Google and get the transit schedule. So as technology is evolving, these things are evolving as well. For a while we had a big push trying to get Our Car and Zipcar embedded into development garages. Well, those things are kind of fading away as the different Lyft and Uber and those car sharing models are popping up. So that's not as important. So this individual strategies will change over time, but a key piece that we call out in our TDMPs is that building should have a coordinator working on this. And it is definitely not a full-time job to do this, but somebody should be thinking about it on a monthly basis or at least an annual basis. Okay, I see Fergal Hand has a question here. I'm going to, we've got a bunch of material to get over in the last 10 minutes, so we're going to hold questions, but we'll hang on and get through the questions.
Yeah,
folks can stay on longer to listen to those.
We will answer them, so feel free to keep writing them.
Yes.
Excuse me.
So then, information. Again, we used to be very big into flyers and bulletin boards in the break rooms and things like that, signs, maps. You can still do that, but as technology comes on board more and more, maybe it's the TV screen in the lunchroom rolls through some of these things, or the intranet site for your company, or however you're communicating employee newsletters.
Putting the information on the website is a big one. Real-time transit screens are pretty hot in the 2 downtowns here, so giving everybody that instant information. The next one, just basically connections. Are all these things connected? I've seen it occasionally, I'll put it, that there is a bus stop within a couple blocks, but then there's no sidewalk to get to it, or it's just a bus stop and there's a patch of grass next to it. So is there a connection to that stop, and is it set up? Or similarly, if there's a regional trail, can they get to the regional trail? So just, if you have these facilities, make sure people can get to and from them.
Yeah, and that's a common theme of ours, even in doing the traffic impact study side of it, is just don't think of the site as an island that stops at the survey boundary. That look a block outside of it to make sure you're connecting all these different modes of transportation and people can get where they want to without jumping in the car. And also making sure things are well lit. You have bike racks, both indoor, outdoor, conveniently located, secure. A lot of different strategies, but those are all in the guide.
So the next one is the carrot, the proverbial carrot, giving incentives. This can be monetary or not. An example of something that's non-monetary would just be preferred parking. You put parking spaces up front for carpools, something like that. An example of monetary might be discounted transit passes, something like that. So there's a variety of incentives that you can look at to try to encourage the other mode. And like you said, they don't all have to be money. They can be other ways.
So then on the other side of it, the disincentives of, hey, maybe you should have the parking next to the building. If it's a parking ramp, it should be controlled and it should cost to go into the ramp, but maybe it's free if you are in a carpool van or something like that. Yeah. You can work out the strategies to give discounts to those people who are carpooling or committing to working a 4-day schedule instead of 5-day, or there's lots of mixing and matching.
Yeah, so basically the carrot and the stick. How can you get people to go to the behavior we're hoping? The last one here is just flexibility, and this is really looking at what are those work schedules? What are those delivery schedules? Can people go outside the peaks? If we can take a few percentage off the peak travel, spread that out to other hours, again, less infrastructure that we need. So yeah, maintaining that flexibility for your workers or whoever else it might be, you know, controlling that stuff to the best of your ability.
Yeah, and these things, if your clients are the actual employers, these are important conversations to have with them. It seems like definitely flexible hours and telecommuting and all of those things definitely seem to be the trend without us having to bake them into a travel demand management plan. But if the employers do those things, definitely include it in the TDMP or discuss it with them as an option. So please dive into sending us some questions. We'll get to those in a moment. And here's the info. Text 44222 to traffic and text in traffic corner, and we'll shoot you the management strategies guide, or you can email Nancy at ncrow@spacconsulting.com. I'll go back to that screen in a moment. Of course, always send Bryant or I questions if you have questions about these topics. We've written extensively about travel demand management at MikeOnTraffic.com. Coming up at the end of June, we're going to be talking about fast food versus fast casual, which more and more is becoming an issue of teasing out what the difference is in your traffic studies. We are unsure on what our schedule is going to be in July with the 4th of July holiday. So we'll stay tuned for what our upcoming schedule is for the rest of the summer. So turn back so you can get your free guide, but let's turn over to questions. Fergal asks, is it fair to say that a TDMP is a more comprehensive study than a TIS? In what instance would a TDMP be required instead of just a TIS? Is there a trip generation threshold, for example? I will start out with talking about some of the jurisdictions here in Minnesota, and seeing in a couple of other urban areas that a TDMP is required for every new use, where sometimes a traffic impact study is not required. So just the basic document of committing to implementing these strategies, and sometimes it's just a checklist that city staff will provide. Bloomington and Eden Prairie in Minnesota, if you dig into their websites, they don't require this extensive of a plan, but they do require the developer to check off, go through a checklist as part of the approval process.
The first part of that too, yes, I think it's fair to say that the TDMP is more comprehensive. Like we talked about with our table of contents and our setup, the TIS actually becomes a part of our TDMP if we do that. So yes, it's a summary within. The TIS is focused on one particular mode of traffic. Most often the TDMP covers all of them.
Right. So I guess our opinion, at least my opinion, is there really isn't a trip generation threshold. I would like to see some level of TDMP done for every development, even if it's just a checklist that the planner in charge of the project goes through with the applicant.
Well, and that's a good point for our TIS, and people have seen this if they've tuned into some of our other traffic corners. We always include a site review in the TIS, which is not a full TDMP. We don't necessarily bring out strategies or that, but we do call out some of those connections, making sure, like I talked about before, making sure that they can get to the bus stop, or making sure that bike parking is available. So we hit some of those elements if we're not doing the full TDMP.
Yes, we'll still talk about bike racks being conveniently located and those kinds of things with their site plan review. Carzon asks if we can get a copy of the presentation. You'll get after the fact a link to the online We'll post the video of this presentation out on YouTube, and we'll send you a link to that so you can grab the YouTube video after the fact. Okay, are there any other questions? How does the study accommodate travel demand changes with economic factors? Let's see, I'm trying to tease out what you mean by that, Gregory.
So I'm assuming that's if there is a recession or something like that, if the whole travel demand goes down, is that?
Yeah, they don't, I guess
is that it, or it could be the money applied to each of it?
Yeah, we typically don't factor that in. Recessions, changes in retail demand for zoning, land uses. If there's a complete turnover of the land use, I would hope that the city would require through their building permits and such that the new tenants would be required to do their own TDMP that would supplant the old use. Typically when we write our TDMPs, they're often done for a developer, but then we'll have some language in there that this should pass on to if ownership changes for the building, that it needs to be tied to the building and have a ripple effect process as tenants change and so forth.
Yeah. It is just after 1:01 now. So I just want to say thanks everyone for attending. We are going to continue answering questions, so we'll continue to hang on the line as long as people have some questions. So thanks again, and now we'll get back to the questions.
Okay. It seems there's an emphasis on employer-based uses. What has been your experience with TDM strategies and plans for residential developments? Great question. We do TDMPs on the residential side as well.
Yep.
And the strategies implemented are somewhat different, but we go through them and develop a TDMP. The thing on our long to-do list is to actually go do a similar study like we did at employers of how effective are the TDMPs in reducing trip generation and parking generation needs. But we have not conducted that research yet. Stay tuned. But yes, we definitely employ TDMPs on the residential side as well. Okay, Fergal talked about in Abu Dhabi, basically their impact studies are travel demand management plans that cover both the supply and demand side. And that's really what TDMPs have become in Minneapolis as well, is that they're a comprehensive document. We've just decided to break them into a traffic impact study component that's attached inside the travel demand management plan. We found as a cleaner way to present the information.
And I think as we continue moving into the future with technology and everything, I think we will see the TIS get left behind, and I think our studies will morph into more of the TDMP, whether they keep that name or not, but you'll see more of an emphasis on covering all modes.
Yes, and that's being reflected in the highway capacity manual and the methodologies for bicycle and pedestrian capacity. Someday that will become much more mainstream. Cody asked how much time do we typically put into a TDMP, and the TDMP itself is typically a day to 2 days, depending on how big of a development, how much background. That's in addition to doing a traffic impact study component.
Yeah, that sounds about right. A lot of this is thinking your way through it. There may not be a specific computer program or analysis to run, but it's really trying to think your way through the development as to how you set up these strategies and encourage other modes.
Yeah, but as I mentioned, some of these other cities have basically boiled it down to just a checklist and what is the developer agreeing to. And also some of those cities have penalties written in if they are not implementing the strategies. They require them to escrow some money and they will go out and hire a third-party coordinator or penalize them. I've seen different kind of on the stick side of the carrots and sticks, trying to get these strategies actually implemented.
Yep.
Okay.
All right. Last call. Any other questions that we can help people with? Okay.
So that seems like it for questions. Thank you, everyone, for hanging on and joining us in the summertime here. I know everyone's busier with taking vacation, so we really appreciate it. And feel free to email Bryant or I or Nancy here if you have any questions. We'll see you in a couple weeks. Thanks, everyone.
Sounds good.